In this video, we're going to look at solving for x, and notice that even though this is a two-step equation, we actually have division going on. So notice that your variable is in the spot of the numerator, and then we have 5 as a denominator. So what do we do in this situation? So first, just go ahead and go back to the basics, and remember that in the end, once we solve this, our goal is going to be that we want the variable on one side, and we want the constant on the other. So I'm just going to write right here, we have the variable. Typically, we want it on the left in our final answer, and we want the constant, which is going to be the numerical value that does not have a letter, or what we call a variable. So notice the constant values, I wrote them in black pen, and the variable, I wrote it in pink pen. So anytime you get one like this and you have this division occurring, what we need to do first is move the constant and get it away from it. We want to separate it from the variable. So I'm going to go ahead and do that by using inverse operations. And notice that we currently have a positive 75. And when we talk about inverse operations, we're talking about operations that are opposite each other. So for instance, the inverse operation to addition would be subtraction. And the inverse operation to multiplication would be division. In this case, I know this is addition because it's a positive 75. So therefore, I'm going to do the opposite of adding, which is subtracting. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 75. Now, you don't have to do this next part, but I do like to draw what I call a fence or a divider when I'm doing a problem like this, to remind myself that there are two different sides to the equal sign. Because as we're doing this, we're going to be having to make sure that this equation is balanced out, which means whatever we do to the right side, we have to do to the left. Now, on this right side, I'm subtracting 75, so that this 75 right here that's positive can be canceled out. And I can show you with my calculator. If I were to put that in my calculator, I'm always going to treat this as if I'm adding. So for instance, I have a positive 75, and then I'm adding a negative 75 to it. Notice that gives me 0. So this actually zeroes out. So I'm going to go ahead for my constant over here. I'm going to put a 0 there. And now I need to go and subtract 75 from the left, because once again, we have to keep this balanced. Anything we do to one side, we have to do to the other side. So I have 100 plus negative 75. And that gives me positive 25. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write my positive 25. Now I am going to write it a little bit lower than a 0, because I'm going to go ahead and bring down my variable that's over here. And we're going to continue working out this problem. And I do like to keep everything lined up with each other. So now we got rid of this 75, right? It canceled. Sometimes teachers will tell you to just cross it out. But all we have to do now is get rid of this denominator of 5. And we'll have x isolated by itself, and it'll be solved. Now the way I want to do that is, right now, anytime you see a division bar, I call this a fraction bar too. Anytime you see a bar like this, that means division is occurring. So x is being divided by 5. And if I go over here to division, the opposite of division is multiplication. So what I'm going to do to get rid of this division situation is I'm going to simply multiply by the denominator, which is 5. Now when I do that, believe it or not, there's a rule that tells us that these cancel out. Now I'm going to make a side note over here to show you why they cancel out. So let me just go ahead and I'm going to prove to you that they do cancel. And when I say cancel, the only thing that would be left over is simply this x. And let me go ahead and draw an example over here. So for instance, I'm just going to use this example right here. Let's say we had 3 over 4. Now I want you to notice that 4 is my denominator. I'm just going to write right here, this is a note. Now if I multiply by that denominator of 4, so in other words, 3 over 4 times 4. Then I'll multiply 3 times 4, which gives me 12. And then after I've multiplied that, 4 just comes over under the 12, right? Because anytime I multiply by an integer or a whole number, really, it's, if I turn it into a fraction, it's like saying 4 over 1. So 3 over 4 multiplied to 4 is the same thing as multiplying 3 over 4 to 4 over 1. And you just multiply straight across. 3 times 4 is 12. And 4 times 1 is 4. However, if I take the answer now, which this was my answer, 12 over 4, and I were to simplify that, right? So I'm going to show you what I mean. I'm going to hit alpha y equals enter to get a fraction bar, and I'm going to put 12 in my numerator, 4 in my denominator, and when I simplify it, it just comes out to be 3. So this is actually equal to 3. So notice that anytime we multiply by the denominator, they cancel, and they just leave you with the numerator as your answer, right? Because when I multiplied these out, it gave me 12 over 4. When I simplified 12 over 4, it gave me 3. So just as a rule to make things simpler for yourself, if you want to get rid of a fraction, simply multiply an entire fraction by the number that's in the bottom, the denominator. And then you can just cancel them out and bring down your numerator, and that is your answer. No different than 3 over 4 times 4 gives me 3. Now let's go and get back to this problem and continue working on it. So we've gotten rid of that denominator. Now one thing, notice in this equation I told you we have to keep it balanced. So it is being balanced right now. Right, we just multiply by 5. And so if we want it to be balanced, we also have to multiply the left side by 5. No different than when we did the subtraction initially. If I subtract the right by 75, I have to subtract the left by 75. If I multiply this on the right by 5, I have to multiply this on the left by 5. So I'm going to go ahead and do 5 times 25. And notice it gives me 125. So 125. Now, I have x is equal to 125, and imagine we're just going to grab this with a spatula and flip it over just like if you flipped a pancake. And so I'm going to move this over here, 125. And that is your final answer. So x is equal to 125.